Who do you want to live next door to? Who do you want to raise kids next to? Or do you want to live next to George Bailey? Do you want to live next to Jeffrey Epstein or do you want to live next to George Bailey? Right? Because these ideas of fighting against the banks and fighting against aristocrats for the common man is very much in keeping with what used to be American values.
Borrow money. What does that get us? A discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class. And all because a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir 'em up and fill their head with a lot of impossible ideas.
Right. Impossible ideas. Impossible ideas like what? Because this is the upside down. We are entering the upside down, where we are starting to see very clearly that the ideas and values that seemed very center, right? They were very central to what it was. They were central to our values. They were homegrown values. They weren't calling George Bailey a communist, right? They weren't saying he was an evil baby killer when he gives his famous speech to Potter.
Now, I say...
Just a minute, just a minute. Now, hold on, Mr. Potter. Just a minute. Now, you're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny ante building alone, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character because his whole life was... Why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never...
Remember I have to keep, I don't want to get in trouble with the, what is it? With the, who is it? I don't want to be cut out. So we have to take a little mini break there. But this is the famous speech when he fights for the working man. Do y'all remember that? This is what the vision I had when I meditated and did my remote views last night. And Spirit said, well, why don't you just ask the audience, who do you want to live next door to? And get off this whole political trip. Do you want to live next to George Bailey or do you want to live next to Jeffrey Epstein? Because our values, my values are with George Bailey. I think everybody, I don't think that we should take out a 50-year mortgage to buy a house. We need to get off attacking each other politically.
Once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Probably... Here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that do you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway...
Let's talk about it. Is he a communist? Is he an enemy of the state? Is he a threat to U.S. democracy? What is George Bailey asking for? So If Bernie Sanders stood up and gave that exact same speech, what would be the Republican response? That's kind of where we're at right now. And I just think it's a teaching moment for all of us. I think it's a teaching moment for all of us that we have lost our way and we have to get. Oh, you think he's a socialist, communist? That's right. Well, if that, then I'm all for it. Uh, $5,000 to buy a house, right? $5,000 to buy a house in 1945 or whenever this was supposed to be. Was it supposed to be before or after the war? It was it was before the war. Okay, so we'll say it was like 1939. So what would $5,000 be? Somebody go ahead and Google it. What would $5,000 be today if it was, say, 1935? We'll say 1935. We'll be generous. And that was the average price of a two-bedroom. What was he say? A 2 to 3 bedroom house, right? So a poor working family would have a 3 bedroom house. Mom and dad would have their room. The boys would have a room. Remember that? And the girls would have a room. I remember this. I was one of 7 children. Bunk beds, right? So you'd have 2 bunk beds. That would fit 4 boys, right? I always wanted the top bunk bed. I fought for that bunk bed, right? 4 girls, 2 bunk beds, right? And you made it work. But the bathroom situation, you had 1.5 bathrooms. Remember that? What a nightmare that was. I think we had 1.5, and at one point we also had an outhouse, but nobody wanted to use it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, your first house you bought in Texas, Joel, was $5,000 in 1976. So, according to Google, thank you. Somebody went ahead and looked it up for us. Hi, Annie. Thank you so much for doing that. According to Google, he was saying that you had to come up with $118,000. Well, he makes a good point because if a person cannot get a savings and loan, cannot get, but the issue was interest rates, right? So George Bailey, his little company was offering really, really low interest rates. They didn't have much. He bought an old house that was going to be that they were foreclosing on, right? He and his wife, right? So they weren't living. The other thing about George Bailey was that he wasn't living any better than anybody else because they were keeping the interest rates down because they were trying to keep Pottersville at bay, those high interest rates that were going to create those slums. And so he became this symbol of fighting for the working man. And sounds an awful lot like Bernie Sanders, sounds an awful lot like AOC. And we have come so far from the center, I think, that those are considered radical voices today. What do y'all think about that? That's right. When you've got that many kids. So George Bailey, he had 5 kids, right? So he was a working class guy with a large family, right? His wife wanted a lot of kids and he didn't, right? He said, "Why do we have all these kids?" Right?